Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're exploring a space that is absolutely fascinating, deeply frustrating, and honestly, pretty overlooked. It's that precise intersection where brilliant million-dollar ideas completely crash into messy, everyday human reality. Imagine spending 6 months and a massive budget on this immaculate corporate strategy only to watch it completely evaporate in a matter of weeks. Why does that happen? Well, to figure that out, we're diving into the groundbreaking work of behavioral futurist Christina Paju. She spent years figuring out exactly why these beautifully designed strategies consistently fall apart in practice, and much more importantly, how we can actually make them stick. So, why do great strategies fail quietly? It's a frustrating reality in almost every organization out there, right? You know how it goes. You have this amazing offsite retreat. The leadership team is totally fired up. Everyone nods in enthusiastic agreement about this bold new direction. The resulting strategy document? It's practically a work of art. But then, Monday morning rolls around, and suddenly the gap between that pristine, visionary document and what people are actually doing on a Tuesday afternoon, amidst a barrage of emails and back-to-back meetings, is massive. The crazy thing is, the strategy almost never blows up in some dramatic, fiery explosion. Nobody officially cancels it. It just kind of quietly, imperceptibly erodes.
Okay, let's dive into this. We tend to treat strategic intention, basically what an organization publicly declares it wants to do, as absolute gospel. But everyday behavior, the chaotic, stressful, habit-driven reality of what people actually do hour by hour, well, that tells a completely different story. Christina Paju's entire body of work focuses relentlessly on this exact translation layer between those two states. Because look, a strategy can be fundamentally flawless on paper, but if it completely ignores the deeply ingrained habits, the cognitive load, and the limited attention spans of the actual, real-life human beings tasked with living it out, it's absolutely guaranteed to fail. You literally cannot just mandate a new future. You have to build a bridge to it.
And to help us build that bridge, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the strategy reality gap, then the quiet future framework, next the 6 conditions for change, followed by sensing the quiet signals, and finally, we'll look at the capability within your walls. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the strategy reality gap. I want you to burn this quote into your memory. Behavior is not produced by intention, it is produced by conditions. This right here is the core thesis of Paju's research, and it completely flips traditional management thinking on its head. When change initiatives fail, leaders almost invariably assume it's a people problem. They think, oh, the employees are just being stubborn or they lack ambition. But that is rarely the case. Change usually fails because the systems and environments people operate in make the new behavior practically impossible. Think about an organization that demands cross-departmental collaboration but keeps budgets completely siloed and only rewards individual KPIs. Those employees aren't stubborn. The conditions are literally rigged against the strategy. Which brings us to section 2, the quiet future framework. Let's see how this builds into a specific methodology to solve this. To actually fix this misalignment, Paju developed what she calls the quiet future framework. Essentially, it's a diagnostic methodology that actively maps out 6 specific conditions to bridge the gap between your strategic intent and everyday human behavior. And what makes this framework so incredibly powerful is its origin. It wasn't cooked up in some sterile academic lab by theorists who've never experienced the corporate grind. Actually, it was built quietly by Paju herself over years of real, practical work. She was navigating her own deep systemic pressures, balancing family life, academic studies, rigid real-world constraints. Because it was forged in the messy gaps of real life, it's deeply grounded in actual human reality. It treats people like people, not like cogs in a spreadsheet. Let's look at the mechanics in section 3, 6 conditions for change. Are your organization's defaults secretly eroding your bold new strategy? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how interconnected all of this is. Misalignment in just one of these conditions severely limits the effectiveness of all the others. Let's break them down super quick. First, we have agency. Do people have the real authority to act or just theoretical permission? Next, defaults. What happens completely automatically when no active choice is made? Then there's friction. This is a massive one. How hard is the new behavior to perform? If you want your team to be super innovative, but getting a $50 budget approved requires a 3-week multi-tiered sign-off, yeah, your innovation strategy is dead on arrival. Next is capacity. Do they actually have the physical time and mental energy? Then attention. What gets prioritized when things get crazy busy? And finally, meaning. Why does this actually matter to the person doing the work?
Let's see what this looks like in the real world. In spring 2026, a Finnish advocacy organization for families, Lapsiperheiden Etujenjärjestö RY, faced a huge strategic hurdle. Now, instead of just setting some lofty, abstract goals, they actually use this framework to ask the hard behavioral questions. To prove advocacy, they didn't just demand more output, they looked at agency and asked, who actually feels capable and safe enough to speak up? To boost voluntary action, they looked at friction and asked, where does volunteering just become too heavy for exhausted, overscheduled parents? By actively removing that friction, engagement naturally went up. They stopped treating strategy like a corporate wish list and started treating it like behavioral architecture.
Moving on to Section 4, Sensing the Quiet Signals. Okay, so before we can successfully change organizational conditions, we have to recognize how our own minds fundamentally get in the way. Let's be honest, humanity's track record of predicting the future, it's notoriously bad. We are deeply cognitively anchored. We over-rely on past trends, we fall for confirmation bias, and we just naturally prefer familiar, safe futures. To combat this, Parju developed a brilliant game-based intervention called Strategic Traps and Triumphs. The game intentionally puts leaders under strict time pressure to make strategic choices. And guess what happens? Under pressure, those hidden cognitive patterns become painfully visible. We like to think we're being hyper-rational about the future, but mostly we're just blindly playing out our own internal biases.
And this brilliantly illustrates how everyday embodied practices train our cognitive pattern recognition. Think about the difference between a ballet dancer and a drummer. A ballet dancer trains for years to notice these tiny micro-adjustments in their ankles, subtle, quiet deviations in form long before they ever actually fall. A drummer, on the other hand, learns to feel systemic movement. They can sense a microscopic hesitation in the bass player's timing and feel how that tiny shift ripples through the entire dynamic flow of the band. Both of these practices teach us to physically feel the future shifting before we even have the vocabulary to name it.
So, to systematically capture these subtle emotional shifts, Paju launched a crowdsourced research project called Futures We Feel, effectively building a behavioral atlas. This goes way beyond standard corporate data collection. It asks questions like, what are people quietly adopting to without being asked? Where are they actively resisting? And crucially, where is agency visibly collapsing? Think about a phenomenon like quiet quitting or widespread burnout. That is agency collapsing. The future isn't just some abstract concept on a quarterly spreadsheet. It's a living thing that moves emotionally through people, causing friction long before it ever shows up as a negative metric in your official data.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Capability Within Your Walls.
There is this massive, incredibly destructive roadblock hiding in plain sight in almost every corporate environment. It's called recognition friction. Basically, this is the hidden structural resistance an organization shows when acknowledging an internal employee's expertise would somehow upset the existing power or stratus dynamics. Think about the all-too-familiar rule of contrast. When an expensive outside consultant comes in and pitches an idea, it's hailed as brilliant, disruptive strategy. But when an internal employee, someone actually in the trenches, suggests the exact same thing, it's totally dismissed as just ordinary work or complaining. This friction doesn't just stall strategy, it quietly and permanently kills employee initiative. So, the crucial point is perfectly captured in this quote. Sometimes the future is not missing, it is already inside the organization. The sheer financial and cultural cost of ignoring this is just staggering. Organizations literally spend millions of dollars desperately searching for external innovation, totally blind to the fact that the exact capability they're looking for is probably sitting right there in Cubicle 4. It remains unrecognized just because of the systemic biases and recognition friction we just talked about. The future you're looking for has probably already been built by your own people. You just haven't given them the agency to show it to you. So I'll leave you with this to think about. What hidden expertise exists right now in your organization that you simply haven't recognized? Before you go out and hire another consultant or draft up your next massive, beautifully formatted strategy document, take a long, hard look at your actual conditions, your rigid defaults, and the talented people standing right in front of you. It's time to stop treating strategy as an intention and start treating it as behavioral architecture. Because that dynamic future you're chasing, it might just be waiting for the right conditions to quietly emerge. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.